surprisingly, our next guest is someone I've known for many, many years because of my connection with Carlton College, thanks to teaching for 25 years on and off at the Urban Studies program, which is how I met Paul Wellstone originally, because he was our faculty advisor to the Carlton students, and something that I think that passed on to you, Rich.
Rich Kaiser.
Rich Kaiser, the head of the poli-sci department.
The poor guy was just sitting in here having lunch. He's in town for a conference, and I just took up a conversation with him.
You just
I said,
jumped
how
on.
about coming on the radio show? He said, I'll do it.
All right.
Good morning to you, Rich.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here.
Welcome to Live from the Heartland. I think you and I shared students, is what I was about to say, the way that Paul Wellstone and I did when Paul would tell his students, you need to go to Chicago, and then they would, and then I would be the politics instructor here and turn them into activists on a city level. And it was a wonderful, wonderful way to meet a lot of good people, that program.
That's right. It was a great experience to work initially with Paul Wellstone. While he was still in the Senate, he paid a lot of attention to what was going on still in the political science department at Carlton in Minnesota, and one of the things that he strongly suggested was that I check out the urban studies program, and he had told me about Katy and the kind of wonderful work that she had been doing with students, getting them active in neighborhoods, in communities, in campaigns, and the connections to the Harold Washington campaign as well. And so it's been a great friendship for many years, and it's surprising this is the first time I've been able to be on the radio.
I know. So what are you up to now, Rich? You got notes in front of you. I know you're at a conference. Tell us what you want the world to know about what you're up to.
Well, actually, I am still teaching at Carlton, of course. That's not really what the world wants to know about too much. But
I am chair of the department.
I am the chair of the Department of Political Science there as well. But I'm also the chair of the Rice County Democrats. Rice County is the county that is about 45 miles south of Minneapolis-St. Paul in Minnesota, and I've been active in the Democratic Party there for a while. And some of your listeners may know that Minnesota has had some topsy-turvy politics recently. We did elect Mark Dayton as our governor, and that is a huge achievement for Democrats across the country. Former Senator Mark Dayton ran on really one issue above all else, and that issue was raising the taxes of the very wealthiest Minnesotans. He made it clear that that's what he was all about, himself being one of the wealthiest of Minnesotans, and he wanted to raise the taxes back to a level that they had been previously under a former Republican governor just probably 15 years earlier than the current time. He was elected, and now we're looking forward to saying goodbye to Tim Pawlenty. He's gone off to Iowa and New Hampshire. Michelle Bachmann also. Your listeners might want to know about them.
How did Minnesota ever come up with a Michelle Bachmann?
Well, that was my question. Was like Minnesota. I always thought of it as kind of progressive, the old Farmer Labor Party. Even though when I used to think of it, I didn't realize that Hubert Humphrey had kind of busted the old Farmer Labor Party. But when we were getting inspired to open the Heartland, there were all kind of food co-ops. You had progressive politics up there. We liked the purple next to the Bears. We liked the purple, the Viking uniforms. What happened? All of a sudden, you started getting conservative politicians, mega churches. Pawlenty becomes the governor. We get Michelle Bachmann. We do get a couple of good senators. We got Al Franken.
Amy Klobuchar.
It's split up there. What's happening?
Yeah. Well, the one-word answer to that is suburbanization. There's been a dramatic increase in the size of the suburbs around the Twin Cities, and those are not homegrown Minnesotans. There's a lot of execs who have come into Minnesota to be part of corporations that are no longer owned by Minnesotans, that have been taken over by other corporations. So they're just middle management people in the suburbs of Minnesota. They're very interested in low taxes. And I'd have to say that after living in Minnesota for 20 years, I no longer think that it is that image that you had, Michael, of the Democratic farmer labor. I really think that Minnesotans like quirky characters. They like people with character.
Who was that governor you had?
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of a bland lot themselves, speaking as somebody who's proud to be from the Philadelphia area. They're a bland lot themselves, and they like people with character, and they loved Paul Wellstone, not solely because he was an incredible left-winger, but because he spoke his mind without hesitation. Jesse Ventura spoke his mind without hesitation, said that he thought prostitution should be legalized and that religion was the opiate of the masses. People didn't always agree with what he said, but they really respected him. And Michelle Bachmann is in that same vein of the kind of person who has simple answers to complex questions, speaks her mind relentlessly, and people in Minnesota look and say, wow, there's somebody who's made up their mind, not wishy-washy, namby-pamby. So I think that that's been, there's other examples in that same vein, but I think that that's one of the things about her. The other thing is that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in Minnesota are both multi-winged. They're really split. There is not a lot of coherence. Most of these elections that elect people like Tim Pawlenty are really the results of multi-candidate races. Tim Pawlenty, I could say without hesitation, would not have won if there was a one-on-one race against the Democratic candidate, particularly the last time in his second run. He only won by 1 percentage point, and the independent candidate, who drew heavily from the Democrats, won almost 7% of the vote. So really, the Republican Party has divisions with the far right that loves Michelle Bachmann, and then the tax-sensitive moderate conservatives. And the Democrats have a Green Party that is active in every single election, an Independence Party that has run people like Tim Penny, a former Democratic Party member of the United States Congress, and then its own regulars. So it's a situation where third-party candidates can sabotage the party that they really are drawing voters from.
How many people show up when Minnesota throws an election these days?
Well, Minnesota, I don't know how many people, but I will say that percentage-wise, Minnesota is one of the 3 largest turnout states in the United States, and it has been that way for probably the last 40 years, maybe even longer, but I only know the data. Engaged, and also election laws, something you people in Chicago know a whole lot about in terms of using election laws to hold down turnout and exclude voters. We have election laws that allow same-day registration, which is really the equivalent of no registration whatsoever. As long as somebody walks into the polls with you and testifies with, not under oath, just claims that you are a resident of the area, you get to vote, even if your name doesn't show up. And so that means that people who are too busy because they're working 3 jobs, students who have never thought about registering until election time, and all kinds of other citizens who are not tied in tightly to the system get to vote. So Minnesota has been a national leader in voter turnout, and it does not really have a whole lot to do with its Lutheran heritage.
Just so you know, you are listening to WLUW 887 Chicago Sound Alliance. This is Michael James and Katy Hogan, and we are here with another edition of Live from the Heartland, and we're talking to Rich Kaiser. He's a political science professor and chairman of the department at Carlton, and he is an activist in the Rice County Democratic Party, and he's a wonderful guy.
Thank you. We're surrounded by wonderful people. It makes it easy.
Yes, it does.
Tell us about Keith Ellison, and how's he look for re-election? How's he fit into the left-right spectrum up there? Is he?
Why don't you tell our listeners who he is?
Well, he is a congressman from Minnesota. Right. He's the first. He's an African American, and he's also the first Muslim member of Congress. And he's been prominent in the news lately when King was holding his hearings, going after Muslims. And Ellison got pretty emotional on the TV and really touched my heart.
And he hasn't backed down at all. He's been extremely forceful in his statements that say, you know, why are we targeting one particular group here? You know, this is a brand of racism that Americans and Minnesotans in particular should be very fearful of. You know, one thing that we have to recognize about Keith Ellison is he was elected in a district that is one of the most Democratic districts in the entire United States. That is extremely fortunate for him because he actually did not do quite as well as other Democrats have done in that district in the past, yet he has really nothing to worry about. He has the party backing, so he's not going to face an internal challenger, and there's no chance whatsoever that any Republican would ever win in that district. So he has a very safe seat, which affords him the ability to be outspoken, and he's put in positions constantly that challenge whether he is going to be outspoken, and so far he has stayed right with the Minnesota tradition, whether it's Paul Wellstone and Al Franken on one side or Michelle Bachmann on the other side, of being extremely clear about what he stands for.
What about Michelle Bachmann's district? Is she solid there, or is there an opportunity for some Democrat or progressive to move in that area?
Well, actually, that's a very interesting question. This past election, Democrats fielded a candidate who was extremely strong and well-funded. I should just point out to your listeners that I do believe that the race between Bachmann and her opponent, whose name slips my mind right now, was the race in the United States Congress that spent the most money in the nation. Now, that's hard to believe when there's districts in New York and districts in California with lots of rich people, et cetera, et cetera. This was a extremely strongly contested race. Bachmann won handily. So she faced an opponent that had no problems with money. Bachmann won really easily. However, in this next election, 2 years from now, her district is going to be one of two in the state that will be changed because of redistricting. Her district has definitely lost population, so she will be losing some of her base, and there's going to be a situation where there's a possibility that two Republicans will end up being pitted against each other for the same target voters. So her future is unclear. I think that the best answer to her future is that there's a high likelihood that she's going to make a strong race for the presidential nomination.
Oh, goody.
Hallelujah.
She's, and as I already suggested, a very capable fundraiser. Anybody who's seen her on television recognizes that she has the pretty face and comportment that impresses a lot of voters. She's very forthright when it comes to her right-wing positions about so-called patriotism and God and morality, and that draws a lot of funding for her from the Tea Party Express. So I expect in primaries and particularly in caucus states that Michelle Bachmann is going to do quite well, and I think she'll do far better than Governor Tim Pawlenty, who at this point is being talked about quite a bit, but I think he's going to fade because he's going to run out of support. He's playing to the same people as everybody else.
So, not to give any of those people a minute more of airtime, and a minute is all we have left. Your role is one that, at this point, since I'm not teaching, I envy. You are in touch with the young people, and you're in touch with them about politics. Do you have hope that we have interests? Are you telling me something,
no,
Michael?
Keep going.
That we have students coming forward who are interested in politics, or is political science falling by the wayside in terms of interest, given that you're here with a bunch of political scientists in Chicago right now?
Yeah, that's That's a tough question. I do think that I don't see students from all across the country, but I'd say that students are very interested these days in environmental issues, energy issues, and gender issues. And unfortunately, the students that I encounter are much less interested in class issues, economic equality and inequality issues. And so the Democratic Party still has what we could consider progressive base among students in America, but it's among students that are often quite self-satisfied and are out of touch with the issues of people who are living in cities.
Rich, thanks a lot for coming on the show. Rich Kaiser from up there in Minnesota. And this is Michael James and
Katy Hogan.
And we want to thank you for tuning into this edition of Live from the Heartland. We want to encourage you all to do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do. Thanks for everyone who make this show possible. I'd name them all, but we're going to run out of time.
All power to the people.
See you next week.